The wind swept across the wide Montana plains, rattling the brittle grass and carrying with it the smell of cattle and distant smoke. Martha Simmons pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as she trudged along the dusty road. Her boots, once new, were worn thin from miles of walking. Each step seemed heavier than the last, but she pushed forward because stopping meant surrender, and surrender was something she could not afford. Life had already taken so much from her husband, her home, her security. She had only one thing left: the will to survive. Martha had been a tall woman all her life, taller than most men in her small hometown. People sometimes whispered, "The giant widow," when they thought she couldn't hear. The name stung, but she learned to live with it. She carried her height with quiet dignity, though inside she often felt like a misfit in her own skin. After her husband's tragic death during a rodeo accident, the whispers only grew louder. Some pitied her, others mocked her. She sold what little she had left, packed a single suitcase, and decided to start fresh somewhere far away. That decision led her here, to the open ranchlands of Montana, where opportunity and hardship often walked hand in hand. Her throat was dry, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. The sun was lowering, casting long shadows across the fences that lined the road. Just when despair threatened to break her resolve, she spotted a ranch house in the distance. Its roof caught the fading light, and a red barn stood tall beside it. White fences ran across the fields, enclosing herds of cattle that grazed lazily, their silhouettes peaceful against the backdrop of the golden horizon. The sight filled Martha with a fragile hope. Maybe, just maybe, the people here would give her work. When she reached the front porch, her legs trembled from exhaustion. She placed her suitcase down and took a moment to breathe. Then, gathering her courage, she knocked on the sturdy wooden door. The sound echoed through the quiet evening. For a moment she wondered if anyone would answer. Then came the sound of boots on hardwood, steady and deliberate. The door swung open, and there stood a man. He was rugged, perhaps in his late 40s, with sun-browned skin and deep lines carved into his face from years of hard work under the open sky. A wide-brimmed hat sat low on his head, shadowing sharp blue eyes that studied her carefully. He wore a denim shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and his hands bore the roughness of a life spent wrangling cattle and handling tools. He was the very image of a rancher, self-reliant and solitary. Martha's voice wavered as she spoke. "Sir, I'm looking for work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, or even help with the cattle if need be. I'll take whatever you can spare." Her words came out more desperate than she intended, but pride mattered little when survival was at stake. The man didn't answer immediately. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and looked at her as though weighing more than just her words. There was silence, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle. Finally, his lips curved into the faintest smile, though it carried no trace of mockery. "Ma'am," he said in a slow, deliberate drawl, "the only position I've got open here is wife." The words hit her like a sudden gust of wind. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out at first. Was he joking, testing her, or did he truly mean it? The boldness of the statement startled her. She had knocked expecting a simple offer of kitchen work or barn chores, not a proposition that carried the weight of a lifetime commitment. Her instincts told her to turn around and leave, but exhaustion kept her feet rooted to the porch. She studied his face, searching for clues. There was no smirk, no laughter in his eyes. If anything, he seemed deadly serious. The situation was absurd, almost comical in its strangeness. Yet the man's sincerity unnerved her even more than if he had been mocking her. She finally managed to speak, her voice steadier this time. "Excuse me?" The rancher straightened from the doorframe. "You heard me?" he said simply. "I don't hire hands anymore. They come and go, take their wages and leave. What I need ain't just work done around here. What I need is someone who'll stay." His eyes held hers unwavering. That's the truth of it. Martha's chest tightened, and 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. Was this man lonely, desperate, or simply practical to the point of bluntness? She had come seeking work, not a husband. She thought of her late husband, how different he had been, full of laughter and risk, always chasing rodeo glory until fate caught him too soon. The memory stirred grief that had never fully healed, but also a reminder of the fragility of life. Marriage to her was not something to be entered lightly, yet here was this stranger offering it as casually as a business arrangement. "I'm not here to marry anyone," she said firmly, though her voice carried the wariness of her journey. "I'm only asking for honest work. Just a chance to earn my keep." Her hand tightened on the handle of her suitcase. She half expected the man to close the door in her face, but he didn't. Instead, he studied her again with that same quiet intensity. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he stepped aside and gestured toward the interior of the house. "You'd better come in before the night catches you. We'll talk." His tone was gentler now, though still measured. It was not an invitation one could easily refuse, not when the alternative was a cold night under the open sky. Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood smoke and coffee. The furniture was sturdy, worn but well kept, and the walls bore the character of a home built by hand rather than bought in comfort. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting a warm glow across the room. Martha set her suitcase down carefully, feeling both relief and unease. The rancher closed the door behind her and removed his hat, setting it on a hook near the wall. Without the shadow of the brim, his face looked kinder, though the lines of solitude still marked it deeply. "Name's Tom Harper," he said, his voice steady. "This ranch has been mine since my folks passed. Been running it alone near on 15 years now." He motioned for her to sit at the table. "And you are?" "Martha Simmons," she replied quietly, lowering herself into the chair. "Widow." The words slipped out before she could stop herself. It was both explanation and shield, something that often spared her from further questions. But Tom only nodded, as if he understood without needing details. He poured her a cup of coffee and slid it across the table. The warmth seeped into her hands as she wrapped her fingers around the mug. For a while they sat in silence, the only sound the crackling fire and the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Finally, Tom spoke again. "I meant what I said at the door. I ain't looking for someone to work here and leave when the season's done. I need someone steady, someone who'll share the load and the life." His gaze was direct, but not unkind. "That's why I said wife." Martha sipped the coffee, letting the bitter taste steady her thoughts. She could not deny that part of her was drawn to the simplicity of his words. There was no pretense, no game, no false promises. Yet the idea was outrageous. To tie herself to a stranger in a land she barely knew was more than she could fathom. Still, exhaustion dulled her resistance, and curiosity kept her from walking out. "You don't even know me," she said at last. "Why would you offer something like that to a woman you just met?" Tom leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Because I can tell you're not the kind to run. You've got the look of someone who's lost but still fighting. That kind of grit, it's rare, and I reckon you don't have anywhere else to go, do you?" His words were blunt, but not cruel. They were simply the truth, laid bare between them. Her cheeks warmed, though not from the fire. He had seen through her in minutes, and though it unsettled her, it also felt strangely relieving. She was tired of hiding her struggles, tired of pretending to be stronger than she felt. For once, someone recognized her vulnerability without using it against her. Martha set the mug down and met his gaze. "You're right," she admitted softly. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Her voice trembled, but the confession lifted some invisible weight from her chest. Tom nodded, as if he had expected no other answer. The night deepened outside, the wind rattling the windows as the fire burned low. In that quiet ranch house, two lives, one scarred by loss, the other hardened by solitude, had crossed paths in the most unexpected way. And though Martha did not yet know what choice she would make, one thing was certain: her journey had brought her to a door that could change everything. The ranch house was quiet the following morning, save for the distant calls of cattle and the rustle of the wind through the grasslands. Martha awoke in a small guest room upstairs, surprised she had slept at all. The bed was plain but comfortable, and the quilt smelled faintly of cedar and wood smoke. For a moment, She simply lay there, staring at the ceiling beams, trying to piece together the events of the previous night. She had come seeking work, and instead had been confronted with an offer that seemed absurd on its surface, yet strangely serious. The words still echoed in her mind. "The only position I've got open here is wife." She rose, smoothed her dress, and washed her face in the small basin provided. When she stepped downstairs, she found Tom Harper already at the kitchen table. He had been up for hours, no doubt tending to the animals before sunrise. His hat rested on the chair beside him, and a plate of biscuits sat on the table. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room. He looked up as she entered, his expression calm but unreadable. "Morning," he said simply. "Morning," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. The silence stretched until Tom poured her a cup of coffee and slid it toward her. She took it with a nod of thanks, sipping slowly as the warmth steadied her nerves. Neither of them spoke of the proposition immediately, though it lingered between them like a presence neither could ignore. Instead, Tom asked about her life, where she was from, how she'd come to be on the road. Martha answered carefully, sharing fragments of her story while leaving out the parts too painful to voice. She spoke of her late husband, a rodeo rider full of reckless charm, whose death had left her adrift. She spoke of selling her belongings, of wandering from town to town in search of work. Tom listened quietly, never interrupting, his gaze steady and thoughtful. When it was his turn, he spoke of the ranch. He told her how his parents had worked the land, how he had inherited it after their passing. He described the endless labor of running cattle, fixing fences, and keeping the ranch afloat with little more than grit and determination. Workers had come and gone, but none had stayed. Over the years, the solitude had weighed heavier than the work itself. "I wasn't joking last night," he said finally, his voice firm but not harsh. "I don't need a hand who'll leave when the next town calls. I need someone who'll stay, who'll share the burden and the life. That's why I said what I said." Martha set her cup down, meeting his eyes. "Marriage isn't a job, Mr. Harper. It's more than sharing labor. It's trust and love, and—" She stopped, the word catching in her throat. She wasn't sure she even believed in love anymore, not after watching it end so suddenly, so cruelly. Tom nodded slowly. "I know that. I also know I'm not a man who deals much in fancy words. I won't pretend to be something I'm not. But I can offer honesty, a roof over your head, and a place at my table. If something more comes with time, then so be it. But survival comes first." His bluntness startled her again, but there was a kind of dignity in his honesty. He was not offering romance or charm, only steadiness. In a world that had already shown her its cruelty, maybe steadiness was worth more than fleeting promises. She did not give him an answer then. Instead, she agreed to stay for a while, to work in exchange for room and board. Tom accepted her terms without argument, though there was a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Perhaps hope, perhaps caution. Days turned into weeks. Martha learned the rhythm of ranch life quickly. She rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast, then spent the mornings cleaning, mending clothes, and tending to the garden. In the afternoons, she followed Tom into the fields, learning how to mend fences, herd cattle, and even ride the horses. Though the work was exhausting, it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her hands grew calloused, her muscles sore, but her spirit began to heal in ways she hadn't expected. Tom was a patient teacher, though his manner was quiet and serious. He rarely wasted words, but when he did speak, it was with thoughtfulness. Slowly, Martha grew accustomed to his presence, to the steady way he moved through the world. He never treated her as fragile or incapable. Instead, he expected her to work alongside him, shoulder to shoulder. In that, she found respect. In the evenings, they would share supper by the fire. Conversation was sparse at first, filled mostly with talk of the day's work. But over time, little by little, more personal words slipped through. She learned that Tom had once been engaged long ago, but the woman had left for the city, unable to bear the isolation of ranch life. He had never tried again after that. She told him of her late husband, of the grief that had nearly broken her. To her surprise, Tom did not flinch away from her sorrow, nor did he offer empty comfort. He simply listened, and somehow that was enough. As winter settled over the plains, the bond between them deepened in quiet, unspoken ways. One evening, after a long day of battling snowdrifts to keep the cattle fed, Martha found herself laughing at something small Tom had said. It startled her, the sound of her own laughter after so long. Tom looked at her then, his eyes softening, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was not the reckless spark she had once known with her husband, but something steadier, safer. Something that might last. Still, doubt lingered. One night, as the wind howled outside and the fire flickered low, she asked him, "Why me? You could have asked any woman in town to come here, to share this life. Why a stranger on your porch?" Tom leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "Because you knocked," he said simply. "Because you didn't come asking for charity, but for a chance to stand on your own 2 feet. Because when I looked at you, I saw someone who wouldn't run when things got hard. That's rare, Martha. Rarer than love at first sight, rarer than promises people break when the going gets tough. I saw grit, and grit is what keeps a ranch and a life together." His words settled deep in her heart, resonating with a truth she couldn't deny. She thought of the long road behind her, of the miles she had walked, of the nights she had endured alone. He was right, she had grit, though she had never thought of it as something worth valuing. And now here was this man, seeing her not as a burden or a curiosity, but as a partner in strength. By spring the land began to thaw, and with it, so did Martha's hesitation. She realized that the ranch no longer felt like a temporary refuge. It felt like home. The work, the land, the quiet companionship of Tom Harper, it all rooted her in a way she hadn't felt since before her husband's death. One morning, as they stood side by side repairing a section of fence, Tom paused and looked at her. "Martha," he said slowly, "I won't ask again if it makes you uneasy. But if you've found what you need here, if you've found a place to stay, then maybe it's time we stopped dancing around it." Well, she met his gaze, the spring sun warming her face. For the first time, she felt no fear at the thought of saying yes. It wasn't desperation or loneliness driving her choice, but a quiet certainty. She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll stay. I'll be your wife." Tom didn't grin or boast. He simply tipped his hat, his eyes shining with a rare softness. "Then we'll make it work. Together." And so, under the vast Montana sky, 2 souls once marked by loss and solitude found a new beginning. It wasn't the kind of love written in poems or sung in songs, but something sturdier, built on respect, resilience, and the simple promise of staying. For Martha, it was not the life she had imagined, but it was a life worth living. And as she stood beside Tom Harper, watching the cattle graze in the golden fields, she knew that the door she had once knocked on in desperation had opened into something far greater than she could have ever hoped for.